Today, we're going to cover everything you need to know about buying and selling at the same time. Jaden, let's kick things off.
Yeah, I got a phone call from Tom and Talia the other day. We'd helped them 3 years ago buy their first home. It was a beautiful apartment, 1 bedroom here in Brisbane. They were pretty excited because Talia was pregnant, but they weren't excited because they needed to upgrade their home, in the next 9 months. It had to happen pretty quickly. So we went through the numbers. We went through the option of potentially turning their home into an investment and buying a new home. Didn't quite work because of the borrowing capacity. We looked at trying to do a bridging loan, but they didn't have enough equity to do that. So the one we landed on was buying and selling a home at the same time, which is what we're going to cover off in this video. I guess the reasons why you would do this is probably potentially market conditions, or in Tom and Talia's case, it's borrowing capacity. They didn't want to have too much debt. The banks actually wouldn't lend them enough money to hold on to their existing plus buy the new one. So Nathan, what are the mechanics? How does work? Why would you do it?
Well, that's exactly right. And as we see in Tom and Talia's case, in a lot of situations, you might have a few different options you're thinking of, but you don't realize what you qualify for, what might cost more. So today we're going to look at 4 different avenues you have for buying and selling at the same time. We've got bridging, like Jaden talked about earlier. You got turning your existing property into an investment property. You got the opportunity to sell first, then buy later, or the last one, which is selling simultaneously. Jaden, let's start off with selling simultaneously. What does this look like? I've heard it before, but I don't really understand it.
Yeah, so practically speaking, it means that you go out there, you list your home for sale, you try and get a contract, and you try and do it a bit longer settlement terms. You might say, all right, I want to settle and sell my home in 60 days. In that 60 days, you've got to go find the new home to try and potentially buy, sign a contract, and get it all to line up to all settle. Your existing home sells, then your new home settles on the same day because the deposit comes to the sale of your existing home, Tom and Talia's apartment. For their new home, their home they're looking at buying here in Brisbane. So the tricky thing is trying to coordinate that all to happen at the one day. But the benefit is, well, you're not paying extra interest because you're only holding the one loan. It all sort of happens over the same time. And you're not moving twice, which is usually the motivation for most people to say, well, at least I have to move. I have to sign a new rental agreement. I have to sign a new lease. I have to move to mum and dad's. It makes it a little bit easy from that point of view.
And this is where you need to get legal advice. So in that time where you've bought and trying to settle at the same time, you want to make sure you have the right terms in your contract to protect you in the event that the sale of your existing home loan doesn't go through. The one thing with all these options here is each one of them are going to have pros and cons. And this is where you need to weigh it up and see if it makes sense. And working with the mortgage broker like ourselves can help to understand that better.
Yeah, I know with Tom and Talia, one thing they were trying to do is potentially, rather than selling their home first, they tried to go out to the market and say, well, let's find a home that we really like. Let's sign a contract on that home subject to the sale of our existing home. What they found in the current market, when it's a bit more of a buoyant market, is a lot of sellers aren't willing to accept that. They're not going to say, Nathan, here's a property. I'm going to sign it to you. I'm going to take it off the market and it's subject to the sale of your own home because it's, well, how long is a piece of string? Nathan could be trying to get $30 million for an apartment. That's definitely not worth that. So a lot of sellers aren't willing to accept that clause.
And that clause is known as a sunset clause. So I guess in section 1 we've talked about here with trying to sell simultaneously, we can see that there's some pros and cons to that. Jaden, let's walk through the second option that a lot of buyers and sellers have, which is selling first, then buying at a later date. Walk me through why that's going to be good for some people, why that's going to be the pros and cons really of doing that.
Well, so I guess the first benefit of selling first is you know how much deposit you've got to play with. You sell your home, you walk away with $50,000, $100,000, and you've got that in your top pocket after agents fees, and you know what you've got to go towards your new home. The downside, though, is a couple of things. The market conditions can change, which Nathan will take us through the story and tick on that. The lending conditions can change. So we've seen borrowing capacities come back over the last year or two. If rates go up, your assessment, your borrowing capacity today could be less in 6 months' time. And the third thing is just you potentially have to sign a lease. You got to take on that burden again. You got to move your stuff twice. It's a bit of mucking around. So Nathan, take us through the story of you had a client a couple of years ago that sold and hasn't been able to buy since.
Yeah, look, I had a client, Tim, in 2019. He had a property in the northern suburbs of Brisbane where he sold for $450,000. It was his first home. He'd bought it, owned it for about 4 years, and he had every intention of getting back into the market. When he sold in 2019, it was when COVID was just hitting. He was really a little bit pessimistic about the market, worried about what was going to happen, sold the home, had about $100,000 ready to go for the next purchase, but invariably never got back into the market. He was waiting for the market to dip. Unfortunately, the market never dipped. In Brisbane, the market went up by about 30%. His property he sold in 2019 is now worth $700,000. So the real problem when you sell and then wait to buy is the longer between the settlement of your home, between the next purchase, you can have market fluctuations. Yeah, sure, the market can go down in that situation there where Tim sold his property in 2019. The market's only gone up, and he's found it really challenging with his 100 grand deposit to get back in the market, because the other thing that happened was some of his cash needed to be utilized to buy a new car because his car broke down, and then his 100,000 he thought he had in deposit now has dwindled down due to cost of the car, cost of living, rent costs going up. So you really want to be careful with this option here. You want to try and buy and sell as close to each other as possible. We call it buying in the same market. So in 2019, yes, you might have sold low, but you're also buying low as well. And on the flip side, you might sell high, you're going to have to buy high. So whatever you lose on one side, you gain on the other side. And you ideally want to be doing any of these options as close to each other as possible.
Yeah, so trying to assess the state of the market, knowing that, all right, I might sell my home for a bit of a lesser price, but I'm going to get something for a better deal if you're buying in the same market. So it's an important thing to consider. So Nathan, if you're looking at potentially going the other route, so doing the simultaneous settlement, having it all settle at the same time, what are some advantages or disadvantages to try and do like a longer settlement period? So on the new home you're buying, you say it's going to be 60-day or 90-day settlement to give you more time. How does that work?
Well, look, I think the key here with the simultaneous settlement is it is ideal for a lot of people where you can purchase and have a prolonged settlement whereby you can line up your next purchase. You do need to be careful because once again, depending on the market, in a lot of cases, if you are struggling to find that next property, you might have to sell first and then buy second. And that's where that interim measure where you need that accommodation for maybe a month or 2 months where there's a lap over is really difficult and a challenge. And that's where we've had clients rely on in-laws. We've had some clients use Airbnbs, other clients, sort of looking at moving in with siblings or friends or families. That can be real challenging because you have a lot of stuff that you need to move, find temporary sort of accommodation for and things like that. Now, Jaden, let's talk about the third option, which is bridging finance. What does that look like and how does that work?
Yeah, so a bridging loan is a temporary loan a bank will give you. They'll say, Nathan, we're going to give you 6, maybe up to 12 months to sell your existing home. And in that time, you can go out and buy a brand new home. We're going to give you a bigger loan, a bridging loan, which is going to kind of cover that period. But the downside is they're going to potentially charge a bigger interest rate. And like I said earlier in the video, you need to have sort of 50% equity, 60%, a lot of equity in your property to do this, because the bank, if you're going out and buying a new property for $1 million, they potentially will lend you $1 million across both properties, but it still needs to be under 80% value of both. So it can be challenging if you've owned a property for only a couple of years.
And this one's popular for a lot of families that probably don't have that support network in and around where they live, because you can literally buy the next property, move all your stuff into that next property, and then sell your existing home. Now, the key here is when you do a bridging loan, you need to have your existing home on the market because the bank doesn't want the bridge usually to go more than 12 months. So you have a lot of pressure to sell in that time frame. Some of the risks when you do a bridging loan is you're buying in today's market and then you're selling in the future. So you might buy maybe a little bit more than you expected, and then you're chasing a figure what you might have hoped for to sell your home. And if the market's gone down, you might need to compromise and sell your property for less than you expected. Whereas where we talked about where you sell first and buy second, you know what you're working with up front. In a bridging, that's not the case. You're buying first and selling secondly.
That's where bridging, really the target audience for bridging is downgraders. So if your parents, for example, they're going for a big house to a smaller unit, it makes a lot of sense because they know, the bank knows, well, you're going to have less debt at the end, you're going to have more cash left over, you pay down the loan, they're a bit more comfortable. Where it doesn't work as well is for upgraders. Like Tom and Talia, that couple, you've got a small house, you're going to a bigger home, you're taking on a bigger debt, and if you're trying to bridge into that first, you don't know what you've sold your existing home for. You could end up short, you could end up in a worse position. So yeah, bridging's an interesting one there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's horses for courses. Some clients have done it in the past and they've really liked it. Others, like Jaden said, it can be really challenging. The other thing also is you've got to remember is the interest for the total loan that you've got will be capitalized during the bridge period until you sell the other property. So there can be some costs there. Jaden, let's move on to the last option, which is turning that existing home into an investment. So it's the last of the 4 options you have. What does that look like and how does it work?
So typically you need to have a pretty good income because you're going to keep your existing home loan. That's going to turn into an investment loan. And then you're going to buy a new home. You need to have equity or you need to have deposit to put down as 10, 20% deposit to do that. Now, where I'm sort of finding people are struggling a little bit at the moment is the borrowing capacity, because when the banks are looking at assessment at your existing home or unit, for example, they're looking at your home loan at 9% interest rate. So they're not looking at it and saying, well, Nathan, on paper, it feels like this is positively geared. You might have a fixed rate. You might be able to hold it for long and say, well, it costs me $50 a week. It costs me nothing. Unfortunately for the banks, they're running your existing loan at 9.5%. And then any future rental income you'll get, they discount it by 10 to 20%. So they say, well, there's going to be vacancies, you've got rental management fees, maintenance, that sort of stuff. So the borrowing capacity can be a little bit trickier in this if only one of you working, is maternity leave, different things on there. So that's usually the first thing. If we can get over that, the second item that I can see, and I've seen people get a little bit stressed about, is then holding a big amount of debt. Because if you're buying a new home for $1 million, for example, if you're using the equity from your existing home, you might have to borrow $1 million for that and manage the repayments plus the repayments on your existing. So this is where we can help. Sit down, work through a couple of strategies and look through those scenarios. Say, well, if you sell, you settle at the same time. This is your end debt position. If you're going to upgrade, keep that as rental. This is what the repayments look like and what's going to be comfortable for you.
And we've had clients where we've done this strategy for, they've turned their property into an investment property. And after 6 months, they've decided, you know what, this strategy isn't really for me. And they've sold that investment property. The beauty with this strategy is there's no limits. Like if you could set this up, if it works for you, you can keep it for the next 10 years. If it doesn't work for you, you can always sell that property. Obviously, you don't want to fix in your loan because there can be penalties for breaking a fixed rate. But if you're on a variable loan, you can cancel or close a loan at any stage at that time that you choose.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider with this strategy is to speak to an accountant. They can look at advice around capital gains, around negative gearing, and see once we've worked out the numbers, yep, Nathan, you can definitely do this. You can upgrade to your home for $700,000, whatever it might be. Your accountant can sit down and say, well, there's actually drawbacks for capital gains. There's positives for negative gearing or your tax, and have a proper view. So at least you know when you go in there what you're going to be getting into.
Now today we've covered the 4 strategies on buying and selling at the same time. Here at Hunter Galloway, we're mortgage brokers and can assist with these exact strategies. If you need assistance, hit us up at huntergalloway.com.au or call us directly on 1300 088 065. Guys, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.